Bienvenue. Welcome. We would love if you could introduce yourselves in the chat so we can see who is joining us. My name is Nicole Pita, and I work at the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, and I will be your moderator today. Unfortunately, Teresa Anderson could not make it today, and I'm afraid also Anuka de Silva was going to join us, and an emergency came up, and she cannot join us. But we have a wonderful panel of speakers that you'll hear from, and thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat as you join us. Good to see so many of you here. We're meeting at a very critical moment. Right now around the world, there's growing recognition that today's industrial food systems are unsustainable and deeply unjust. And civil society movements and social movements have long been calling for systemic transformation of food systems to tackle climate breakdown, biodiversity loss, hunger, and inequality together. And communities everywhere are showing how this can be done by protecting human rights, fighting for workers' rights, advancing agroecology, resisting corporate control, rebuilding local food supply chains, and reclaiming the right to healthy, sustainable diets. And this year, there's a very unique opportunity in that the next climate COP, COP30, will take place in Brazil, a country with a rich legacy of food sovereignty struggles, family farming, and integrated food policies. With COP30 as well, hosted in a democracy in the global south, we're expecting a massive civil society presence. And just as importantly, around this time as well, the Nyaleni Food Sovereignty Conference just took place last month. And alongside the COP, the People's Summit will be taking place, which is the most democratic space around the climate COP, a real rallying space for social movements. So together, these convergences are really shaping a powerful agenda rooted in food sovereignty, land and health justice, and community-led climate solutions. Today's webinar is about making these connections clear and actionable. Many in the climate movement, especially those engaged with the UNFCCC policy processes and the COP negotiations, may not yet be familiar with the Nyaleni autonomous space of resistance. That's why we're here. We're here to share reflections from the food sovereignty struggle, to hear directly from social movement leaders, and to explore how climate and food justice struggles can rise up together in the months to come. By the end of today's exchange, we hope to come away not only better informed, but more united and ready to amplify collective calls in our ongoing struggle for systemic transformation and social justice. We're joined today by three amazing speakers. We have Shalmali Gutal, who is a member of the IPES Food Panel and Focus on the Global South, Sophie Ogutu from the World March of Women, and Bruno Prado from the National Articulation of Agroecology in Brazil and the People's Summit. You'll be hearing from them about Nyaleni, about the Climate COP, and about the People's Summit, and what it means and how to rise up together. I think before we get started, it's important to actually set the stage about these autonomous spaces that we're talking about, starting with Nyaleni. And we want to know from Sophie, if you could please tell us, what is Nyaleni? Give us a little background. If someone has heard about it, but maybe doesn't know what it means, where it comes from, what the conference is all about, give us a little background so we understand.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicole. I'm really excited to be here with Bruno and Shalimali, my great comrades. And I'm really, really happy to share who Nyaleni was. It's a beautiful story. Nyaleni remains a very beautiful story because Nyaleni, as it is a global rallying space for food sovereignty. And it was born from farm peasants, indigenous, and small-scale food producer movements that wanted to reclaim how food is produced and traded and even governed. So Nyeleni, sometimes people ask, who was Nyeleni? How come? What did the name come from? It's not in the dictionary. It's not anywhere, you know. But Nyeleni was actually a very legendary woman from Mali. And she was a peasant farmer, a leader, and a symbol of food sovereignty in the African region. She lived in a very small village in Mali, a place called Sirakoro. So, and this in this village, people celebrated her a lot. So she's a big story. People celebrated her a lot in oral history as an icon of her own strength, determination, and very resilient. So she opted to dedicate her life to farming. And she made this a lot as a joke, and she kept on telling people that she is married, quote, quote, to the farm because her joy was really to feed people. And so she was able to feed not only herself and her nuclear family, but the entire community. So, because of her courage and the way she embodied autonomy and resilience, Nyeleni became the symbol of the women's central role in food production and community survival and sovereignty over land and the seeds. So when food sovereignty movements launched the first international forum of food on food sovereignty, it happened in Mali, and this was in the year 2007. And they chose the name Nyeleni simply to honor her legacy and also to root the movement in African women's knowledge and peasant leadership. So 7 years later, the second Nyeleni happened, the second forum, because now it wasn't just an event, it is a process. So the second Yeleni happened in 2014, and then of course the third one just happened in Sri Lanka last month. So this shows us that it's actually a very it's a very great process. And so today, whenever we speak of the Nyeleni process, we invoke her memory as a reminder that food sovereignty is not abstract, but grounded in real lived power of communities, especially women's ability to feed themselves with dignity and autonomy. Sunyeleni is a very powerful space. Yeah. So I don't know if you want me to continue the next question, why it's important, or have to wait.
Yes, no, please.
Okay, yeah. So I think with that, now that we know who Nyeleni was and how it started and why the name Nyeleni, Nyeleni is a very, very important space for social movements because it centers the knowledge of rights and leadership of people who produce food, and translates lived experiences into political demands and practical alternatives. Because we also talk a lot about food sovereignty and agroecology, and we talk about practicality. So we see it from the beginning of Nyeleni, even the way the history of Nyeleni is. So it continues to be a very, very successful space of building up with each other. As a grassroots feminist and a first timer at the Nyeleni Global Forum, I wasn't the first or the second Nyeleni, but that history itself, whenever I hear the history of Nyeleni, I feel like I was part and parcel of that. And I feel so strongly connected to the Nyeleni process. And this third one was actually a lived experience, which was amazing. So it's also very, very important space because it continues to be a very successful space of building up with each other and helping us in terms of our power, our connection, our synergy, and supporting each other. So I saw and felt not only among the African feminists, but globally. Many times here we connect and we coordinate among ourselves as grassroots women working on issues of food. But then Lenny gave us that opportunity to connect globally with a lot of international movements, allied movements that are seriously working on issues of food sovereignty and climate. So for me, I think that it remains very, very important because it is also a process that is built by social movements, connected from the ground. Everybody who's coming up to that top level is building. It is something that is brewed from the ground. Here in Africa, we believe that good food is that food that is cooked for so long, and sometimes like sorry, like if I use an example like in Uganda where they cook bananas from morning to be eaten in the evening. So it tells you that it's actually very, very well cooked food, with a slow fire and things. So for me, this process, the Nyeleni process, is one that is brewed from the ground. It's coming up and we have voices coming from the grounds. So for me, Nyeleni is a very, very important space because it also gives grassroots people that importance and the voices to speak for themselves. Many times for very many years, we've had people speaking on behalf of others. And in some spaces, you still go and you hear people saying, we are here to speak on behalf of the voiceless. I don't think there's anybody who's voiceless. Everybody has a voice. So whenever we have people getting the space to speak, Nyeleni is that space where everybody has a voice. Everybody brings in their practicality. Everybody brings theirs now. And it also remains very, very important because it's a space where social movements who are so ready to create that change and power dynamics around food systems are working within. So, I really love the powerful mantra or the slogan from the third Nyeleni that said, we need the system change. And we were like systemic transformation now and forever, because it is something that people know that it is happening now. And if we really need to change that system, it has to be now and always and every day. Yeah, so I think it's a very, very dedicated space for social movements. It remains very relevant and extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. And I know Shamali, Bruno, and Sophie, the three of you, were at the last Nyeleni Forum last month. And I know there's still a final declaration in the works, coming together with final outcomes. But if you could, just for a few minutes, tell us what it was like to be in that space. What did it feel like? What kind of conversations did you participate in? What happened? Give us a little taste. I'll start with Shamali, and then Sophie, and then Bruno. Tell us about your experience there. Oh, just unmute yourself, Shamali. Wait, almost. Click it one more time.
Yes, done now. Can you hear me? I'm okay?
Yes.
I'm audible?
Yes.
And the interpreters can hear me, I hope?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you, Nicole, and thank you to IPES and CAN and everybody in ActionAid for organizing this meeting and inviting me here. And thanks, Sophie, for a wonderful background on Nyeleni. Well, for me, this Nyeleni was a magnificent space. I was at the first Nyeleni also in 2007. And the Nyeleni that we had just now was very different from the one that we had in Selinge in 2007. Well, of course, we are in a different location and there's a different culture. And so the arrangements that we were making were also very different. In Selinge, which was the first Nyeleni, we actually built where everybody was pitching in to build the huts, make the arrangements for the people, get the food going, get the tents and so on, So it was a different, and it was the very first one, right? We all of us in the food sovereignty movement didn't know how it would turn out, but we had the conviction that it would turn out some way and well, and it did. It was a magnificent success. And as Sophie says, it sort of birthed this long process and also brought many, how we say, people that one may not expect to be in a food sovereignty movement. It brought more and more people into the food sovereignty movement. So the food sovereignty movement really started to blossom. And from there, it blossomed into different formations of Nyeleni all over the world. Now, the Nyeleni in Sri Lanka was different in that, well, one is, of course, it was in Sri Lanka, which has just emerged from a big revolutionary struggle, the Aragalaya movement, and that's been a very strong grassroots movement of the people of Sri Lanka that came together organically, to demand justice and to demand freedom from debt and freedom from the kind of exploitative, extractive global governance, financial economic governance that drove Sri Lanka towards what it is, and towards what it was facing in terms of the economic and financial crisis, no? And then so the Aragalaya movement really was a big inspiration for holding this Nyaleni in Sri Lanka. And central in the Aragalaya movement were actors, were people, social movements who are also central to the Nyaleni movement. So that itself, the fact that our hosts and the organizing committee came from such a strong revolutionary, transformative process and struggles, no? Definitely set a very important tone for the Nyaleni in the third Nyaleni that we were just at. An important aspect, I think, also of the third Nyaleni is that over the last 10 years, in the food sovereignty movement and the climate justice movement have all come together, and the agroecology movement, the convergences have been happening for a long time. But one very important discussion was that the world is changing so rapidly and generally tanking for the worse, So in addition to the recurring food and financial crises and economic crises and this sort of entrenchment of crisis-creating institutions and systems, and then, the diversion of the multilateral system and the United Nations heading towards more corporate control and multi-stakeholderism, then the rise of authoritarianism and fascism in many places, and then the increase in wars and conflicts, and then the sort of demands that we try and create more spaces for convergence of our different struggles. Because when people fight for land, when people fight for justice, when people are fighting against conflicts and occupation, when people are fighting for workers' rights, they're not necessarily tagging themselves as a single justice movement. It's justice for themselves, it's justice for their communities, it's justice for the cause. And so in the food sovereignty movement, in the Nyaleni movement, let me put it that way, it's not only a food sovereignty movement now, it's a movement for justice in the broadest sense. The idea of bringing people together and building convergences from the ground up, this idea has been prevalent, and this is one of the most important and exciting things about what we saw in Sri Lanka. And conversations that oh my goodness, they ranged from ending wars and occupation, stopping unilateral and sanctions against countries. What are feminist? What does feminism mean? What do different types of feminisms mean in practice? How do we stop casteism and racism? What does systemic transformation mean in terms of tackling global systems, building new regional systems? How do we link, more individualized or community-based struggles to broader global struggles? And there was it was a real diversity. And discussions were as rich in the different assemblies that we had, in the different sessions that we had, as they were outside the meeting rooms, during the field trips, during lunches, dinners, lots of, free time. In the evenings, people got together, people sang, danced. There was a wonderful group of women Sri Lankan artists who drew this beautiful mural of fisher folks claiming the ocean. It was really fantastic. And there was a very, very strong solidarity for Palestine, very strong. It was, I think, a solidarity that all of us carried in our heart. And of course, we were there expressing particular solidarity for Palestine, but nobody forgot, and everybody remembered the other places under occupation and wars and conflicts and what's happening to people there. So there's this very, very strong sense of internationalism and solidarity. Why don't I stop here? Sorry, Bruno, I don't mean to take up your place.
That's such a beautiful description, Shamali. And I would love to hear a little bit from Sophie and Bruno from your perspective, how you felt there. But that was, that painted such a beautiful picture.
Yeah, I totally agree with Shalimali. I mean, like we were talking before we started this webinar, and I was just sharing that for the first time, this was a very long forum, like 10 days, and it's a forum that was always full. The plenary was always full. The convergence spaces were always full. which means that people were really grasping and getting to know what's happening. You know, during lunch hour, the tables, the conversations were around the issues that people really wanted to bring. So for me, it was very, very important. And like Shalimali said, I think we also had a presence of people from Congo, you know, who were there and reminded us, especially me who comes from Africa, that we also have other struggles that we have to bring from the international sport to our local reality and to the region. So it really was an opening space. Nyeleni, for me, was really, really a space that helped a lot. And coming from a grassroots women's perspective, I think Nyeleni was 100% gain for women. Many spaces have, for a very long time, women have been secluded in very many spaces, to be honest. And it has been a struggle, even sending people and sharing and saying, no, can you please give us another space? Can you give us a chance for another woman? Nyeleni had 65% presentation of grassroots women from across the board. So for me, this was the first forum where we had so many women coming in, you know, like 65% is a huge percentage. If you're in Kenya, you'll be told that that's illegal, because here we are talking about 2/3 or 50-50, but that was 65%. And the Women's Assembly for me was also another convergence altogether, because the conversations of bringing in what is very, very needed as feminist alternatives, food sovereignty, feminist economy, and having women discussing them in depth from diversity, you know, from across the globe, from different regions with all this diversity. Oh, it was such an amazing space. So I think for me, what we brought back from Yeleni was bigger than what we were actually, personally, was bigger than what I was expecting. Because also coming from this international space where our movement is an international movement, and we have a lot of connections, and we have a lot of synergy, and we work very closely with allied movements like Friends of the Earth and La Via Campesina. These are our very strategic allied movements around the World March of Women. Something that I rarely feel in the region, you know, when I'm at the regional level, I don't feel it the same way I feel it at the international level. But Nyeleni gave us that opportunity. We converged so many times as African women, you know, people coming back after conversations, people coming back and talking about what they think and about the regions. And folks were given space at the Nyeleni to come back and share in the plenary. So this was so democratic. It was so open. And yeah, I mean, everybody would, I think that's more reason why people felt so interconnected. And that's why people didn't want to lose any space within the forum. So it gave us more practicality, you know, like theory and practice almost at the same space. And even having people coming, speaking from their own perspectives was amazing. So, and also I saw a lot of social movements supporting each other. Nyeleni was a space for support. You know, it's many times in our spaces, sometimes we feel like it's a competition. Sometimes we feel like we're scrambling for a small space to bring in. But Nyeleni was really an open space where we saw a lot of support from each other, you know, like people coming in, supporting each other, buying flights for each other, supporting delegates with, and this is what we really need. I mean, within the social movement spaces. So I think the global steering committee of the Nyeleni and the planners really did a great job.
Thank you, Sophie. Bruno, I do want you to talk about the People's Summit and the Climate COP as well, but did you want to add a few more words about your experience at Nyeleni briefly?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, first of all, thank you also for the invitation. It's great to be here with Shamali and Sophie and everyone in the organization. I think well, I can hardly add anything after these beautiful words from Shamali and Sophie. So just to make it very quickly, I was part of Nyeleni through Casas, which is a collective of agrarian activist scholars from the South, and in the Latin America delegation. And for me personally, I think this added to everything that Shamali and Sophie just said now. It's a beautiful, it was a really rich and beautiful experience of seeing the movements, getting together, building convergence, talking from the perspective of ANA in Brazil, the National Articulation of Agroecology. We have been doing this here in Brazil of trying to have what we call the dialogues and convergences. And we know that building convergence is critical. It's sometimes we have the tensions of bringing the convergence and seeing the different perspectives together, but it is also a very powerful struggle in this idea of changing the relations of power, of changing the system and everything. So I think this, just following now Sophie and Shamali, I think it was beautiful to see this sense of belonging there and building together and constructing ideas together that turn into action. Also, and also just to make the point in connection to the People's Summit, I think that it also showed how we can continue this, because that's the idea. No, it's not an event, as has been already said here. It's a process. It's a process of building, of construction, and we see perspectives of getting together and uniting strengths. And the People's Summit, that's going to be in Brazil in the time of the COP30 in November, it's another space that I think follows this connection, follow this the idea of building together, of having convergences, and I don't know, Nicole, if I should just follow a bit more on the People's Summit.
Keep going and tell us a little bit more about what the People's Summit is and what civil society in Brazil is converging around the People's Summit and around the Climate COP.
Yeah, so I think it's important to start by saying that the People's Summit is this autonomous political process. It's going to happen in the days of some of the days of the COP30. It's from 12th to 16th of November, as the culminance point of this process of organization. So it's built by and for social movements, for grassroots organization, collectives, networks, the Brazilian civil society, and in many parts of the world. We have more than 1,000 organizations coming together as signing the manifesto for the People's Summit. These are all organizations and movements committed to the defense of life, of territories, and the planet. And it is a space that says that we refuse to let the climate agenda be captured by corporate interests or reduced to the closed door negotiations that we see as the way the COPs generally take place. And for us in Brazil, especially, I think it has a very special meaning, because the COP is taking place in Brazil after many years, for the first time in many years, a country with a long and powerful history of democratic participation and of social movements shaping the public debate. And also, we see that after 3 consecutive COPs with limited space for civil society in general, the expectations are high for how this participation will take place. So we understand the People's Summit as this place to reaffirm the role of the peoples and movements in defining the way towards climate justice. No? So and maybe we'll have more time to talk about this, but I just wanted to emphasize that the summit, the People's Summit, has 6 convergence axes that is weaving the political agenda. No? So the first one is living territories and Maretório, as we call in Brazil, the sea territories, popular in food sovereignty. The second axis relates to historical reparations, combating environmental racism, false solutions, and corporate power. The third axis is about just, popular, and inclusive transition. The sixth axis is about against oppressions, for democracy, and people's internationalism. The fifth axis is about just cities and vibrant urban peripheries. And the sixth one is about popular feminism and women's resistance in the territories. These axes show the convergence that we're building. So the movements, the organizations are working in these axes to build the Treaty of the Peoples, a political letter, a political manifesto that we want to have together by the end of the summit. And I think it also shows this rich construction of bringing together, of having convergence around this movement of movements, as we're calling it.
Thank you. Thank you for that description. I think the next question I wanted to ask to Shamali is about why it's important to bring social movements and climate movements and movements for food sovereignty together. You were already getting at the answer to this earlier about this world of multiple crises that we live in, but I wonder if you could zero in on what are the shared threats amongst these movements and what happens, what could go wrong if we don't converge and speak with each other. You're muted.
Yeah. Thanks, Nicole. I'll respond to that. And I also, just for all the participants who joined us today, I shared a couple of photographs of that mural. They're not great photographs, but I'm hoping that, there, you can see. So this mural was created over 7 days on the wall of a car park. This is just a small part of it. No, it was very long, of women reclaiming the ocean. Yeah, and it's really beautiful. Like, this picture hardly does justice to it. Well, anyway, so coming back to my question, well, food sovereignty and climate justice are part of the same struggles to build a world that is free from, hunger and malnutrition and exploitation and extractivism, environmental and biodiversity destruction, and the different types of oppressions that people all over the world are facing. The climate crisis is definitely an existential crisis, of course, as we all know. And the industrial food system has a very major role in accelerating the climate crisis. It's not the only one, but it certainly has a major role. And so food sovereignty offers a systemic approach that tackles both the negative aspects of the global food systems, as well as the positive agenda of moving forward to slow down the crisis and have people all over the world in their different capacities move through the climate crisis and survive and live with dignity. Now, if we look at the industrial food system, it has a huge climate footprint because of its reliance on agrochemicals, on trade and marketing infrastructure, and on packaging, storage, transportation, all of which are heavily reliant on fossil fuels. It also has a very large destructive social footprint. Agrochemicals poison our lands and waters, foods. They poison the producers and the workers who produce and provide this food. The industrial food system is built on the labor of poorly paid workers who have to work in unsafe and very exploitative conditions. They're denied workers' rights. Many are migrants with little or no protection legally. And women, of course, face additional challenges of physical safety, sexual abuse, and all the other challenges that go with women being actually defenders and producers of life when they're displaced from their occupations and their territories and lands. The other aspect of the social and environmental footprint of industrial food systems is the issue of industrial livestock and poultry raising, deforestation, land and territorial conversions, destruction of mangroves and seabeds through aquaculture, and large-scale commercial trawling. Again, all of which are significant contributors to the climate crisis. And then when we look at the health issues, the industrial food system, it promotes ultra-processed food, which have resulted in all kinds of increases in non-communicable diseases, malnutrition, diabetes, blood pressure, life-threatening allergies, hormonal changes among women, and so on. Now, this processing also relies on a tremendous amount of fossil fuel usage. So when we look at the industrial food system as a whole, it is a direct enemy of both the climate justice movement and the food sovereignty movement. So I think climate justice cannot be separated out from social, cultural, gender, environmental, political, economic, and intergenerational justice, because this is, think what kind of a world are we leaving behind for for future generations, no? And so when we look at the principles and pillars of food sovereignty and climate justice, I see that they're very complementary. The issues of human and collective rights and the rights of Mother Earth, nature, food provisioning methods and systems that respect, that revitalize, restore, and nurture diverse ecosystems, biodiversity, and that ensure the health of humans, animals, rivers, forests, all ecosystems, and this through agroecology. And agroecology is not only land and production based, but also on water, through gathering, through fishing, through hunting, and so on. And this is one of the wonderful convergences that has come out of our Nyéléni process, no? And also Bruno was talking about that, no? About the convergence processes. So these convergence processes help us to help even the Nyéléni food sovereignty movement to evolve further, to say, okay, is agroecology, is it only land-based? What does peasant agroecology mean for fisherfolk? What does it mean for indigenous people when they defend their own ancestral domains and territories? What does it mean to share the commons? Is that agroecological? Yes, it is. No. Then there are the issues of agrarian reform, aquatic reform, the defense of land and territories, the protection, nurturing of commons, and overall respect and protection, legally, but also societally and culturally and politically, the territories, ecosystems, and landscapes without which food and water are simply not possible, but also the people. I mean, we like to, of course, it is indeed true that people have shaped territories, but the territories have also shaped us. So this idea of agrarian reform and defense of land and territories and commons goes both ways, no? It's a sort of a dialectical process. Then transforming, building, and supporting markets that serve small-scale food producers, providers, workers, local populations, what we call territorial markets. In fact, IPES Food has released a report just last year called Food from Somewhere to actually make a distinction that with territorial markets, food provisioning is embedded in cultures, in territories, in environments, rather than this sort of globalized food system, which is food coming from nowhere, where we don't know where when you go to the big supermarket and find food, you don't know where it's coming from. So the issue of transformation of markets is extremely important as well. So and then we look at the issue of challenging trade, investment, and extractive processes, those that destroy the environment, that destroy our cultures, that destroy food systems, that destroy health. No, again, I see that the climate and food sovereignty movements are completely intertwined there. And I know I've reached my 4 minutes, but if I could have a couple more minutes on the challenges of division, or shall I leave it for the next round? Nicole.
I would like to open the space for Sophie to also come in and add a little bit. But before you do, just to let the public know, there is a Q&A feature if you click the Q&A icon in the Zoom platform, you can please pose questions to the speakers. At the end of the webinar, we'll open up space for Q&A and have the speakers answer your questions. So thank you for dropping that there.
Yeah, sure.
I think you also were speaking about earlier some of the shared threats that we have, especially in terms of some so-called climate solutions that gain a lot of momentum and a lot of funding. And if we're not working together with a social justice lens, what can happen? What could go wrong?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Nicole. I think I totally agree with what Shalimali says, that the climate crisis and the food system crisis cannot be separated. They are together, they cannot be separated from each other. Peasants, pastoralists, fisher folks, indigenous food producers, they all hold territorial knowledge, governance demands, and frontline experience that the climate policymakers and climate justice movements desperately need at this point, because we are at a critical point, to be honest. So we need to be united. We can block a lot of false solutions, when social movements come together. And so social movements cannot dare separate and work in solitude right now. I know that we are asking the question if, but mine is that I think we cannot afford to do that currently, because the critical situation that we are in is actually, it's very, very, very critical. And our unity is key and very, very urgent because of the need to scale the evidence and visibility that we have. Climate impacts on crops, on pastoral lands and fisheries are now very visible and accelerating. So we see communities are struggling to cope, and their solutions are workable and replicable. Somebody once said that a mistake made by the community is 1,000 times better than solutions imposed by experts. So sometimes when when movements tend to separate and work in solitude, then that means that we are actually leaving up that leeway for experts to come and impose solutions. And those solutions, as we know, will give us policies that will not work for the people. The policy window right now is open, but it's very fragile. But I'm also very glad because the social movements are actually working very closely together, like Shalimali has just mentioned. And I think there are more international processes that we are converging together as social movements that is giving social movements that relevant voice and the relevant space that helps them. Nyeleni process, as we heard from us who were there and the people who were there before, is such an amazing process that's helping us to do this. We have community agroecology schools, for example. These are spaces that are helping social movements to come together. And so these are opportunities that are going to help us a lot to push agroecology, land rights, and community-led adaptation into policy, which is very, very important. Corporate consolidation and tech fixes on the rise. We are seeing them every day. We see big agribusiness and tech firms which are trying to push solutions that definitely we know some are false. They'll be here because they're going to be very fast, but we have to do that. And then we are also seeing that it is very important for us to rise together, because at the social movement space, that intersectionality that we see of bringing in the women, of pastoralists, of indigenous communities, of the youth, giving even the young people that voice to speak. We are seeing women talking about youth climate activism. We are seeing women's movements coming up and talking a lot about that. So that does not give us, we need to start thinking and say that we cannot separate our movements from each other. But that question you're asking, if is a very big word. If movements stop talking to each other, then one, we are giving false solutions a chance, a greater chance, because that's what they want in our real solutions. So false solutions will definitely scale up unopposed, paving way for climate policy to validate monoculture offsets, those carbon plantations that we don't want to hear about, or techno fixes that disposes producers. We're going to see a lot of transnational corporations coming in to win, because that's what many of them want, to win. And when they win, then definitely Mother Earth will continue to suffer with all of us in it, including those who are winning right now. And then we're going to have fragmented resistance, This is where we're going to have each sector wanting to do their own campaigns. Oh, we want to campaign because I'm an ecofeminist. I want to just deal with with this. Because I'm an aqua feminist, I just want to deal with water and I don't want to hear about this. Because I'm a radical feminist, I just want to talk about rights and I don't want to talk about that. Then all this is going to give us fragmented. It's going to divide us, you know. And it's going to give us those separate campaigns that also burn our energy as social activists, as people who are working. We're going to burn our energies a lot, but we're going to have very, very, very narrow wins, you know. And corporations and governments that are pushing us back will definitely exploit those divisions. A lot of people will be very happy to see social movements dividing. We don't need to give that a chance. So they'll get a free ticket to the political game that some of them really enjoy dearly. And then policy capture and sidelining of affected voices. We're going to see all these voices that need to be out here. Now we have a voice as grassroots feminists from from wherever. We can come to the global space and speak about what we feel as grassroots women who are in touch and reality with the ground. And when we feel that we are planting and we can't get any food, then we can come up and say that this is what is happening and this is the reality and share in real time. But when we divide, that space will not be there. From that grassroots woman, from Kindu Bay, the village where I come from, her voice will never be heard beyond that neighbor, beyond that farmer. But here we are dealing with a climate crisis, which is, global crisis, food, water, climate. These are global issues. And so even as much as we have local realities, we need to bring them up to the limelight. And then lastly, we can see that if movements dare stop talking to each other, trust me, there's going to be a lot of weakened public legitimacy, because climate action will, many times we've seen it resulting in land displacement, and public support erodes and creates a lot of backlash. So who's going to speak for those people who are eroded? Those people who are, pushed aside. So we need to really come up together, and we also need to draw our collective and bargaining power together as a collective. So the only way we can do that is by continuing to build our synergies as social movements and dare not work or even think about working in solitude. That's why we're building allies. That's why we're working in convergences in spaces like Nyeleni and the People's Summit. That's why we are continually, thinking for how people can bring those realities into the limelight and start looking for tangible solutions. Yeah, because we're so tired of we don't want those false solutions that really take a lot of time out of people and energy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very strong case for why we need to build convergence and come together and work together. But how to do it is tricky because, like you've said, Sophie, there are multiple really concrete demands coming from several different movements. So how can we bring together all those multiple demands and create some unified voice or call to action? How does it look like creating more autonomous spaces, not just at the global level but at the regional level? What does that process look like? Maybe Bruno, can we have you speak to this point?
Yeah, I think it's always adding, no, because it's the conversation here already gives us a lot of answers on how to move forward. I think well, the first thing maybe that in this idea of convergence, I think we're trying to contest the same root. I think it's the commodification of life and nature, and this is uniting lots of the struggles that we're saying here, and putting food sovereignty, agroecology in center with the dialogue, in dialogue with all these issues, no. And this means also, I think the idea of autonomy is really important. So the people, it's the different peoples that they should be controlling land, seeds, knowledge, and policy. And I think this is also central for us to oppose how corporations have been doing this and how we are opposing this, no? So what we are saying here, the agroecology, peasant seed systems, community managed landscapes and livelihoods, local seed banks, all these experiences and practices, and I think they are really, we need really to see these as political technical practices, that are tested in daily lives, in the daily lives of farmers, peasants, fisher folk, indigenous peoples. So they're producing the answers that we need for a time of crisis that we're living, and these are also at the same time political technical practices that climate policy often ignores. So we need to have them every time visibilized and acknowledged in these spaces. And so maybe this is something that that we need to reinforce, no? And we're not, and when we're talking about climate justice, we're not only talking about, as Sophie just said now, we're not talking about techno fixes, we're not talking about techno solutions that come up and they're not controlled by people. I think the main issue here is the questions of power, rights, and redistribution. Who owns land? Who decides what counts as a solution? These are also fundamental things that we're trying to not only give visibility but put into action in these spaces. And I also understand. I think we're also understanding these spaces for convergence as the political space for these things to happen. No, so when we're talking about the continuity of these processes, the People's Summit, the Nyéléni Forum, these different spaces, they are culminations of processes of struggles around these actions and ideas.
Thank you. Shamali, you're still there?
I'm here. Yes.
I'm wondering if you could speak to as well, there are competing urgencies, right? And competing demands, and this creates tension in these spaces, these democratic spaces. How is that navigated?
Well, I think one of the reasons why tensions are created is because our struggles are often fragmented. And not because we want them to be, but when we look at the distribution of resources, the distribution of power, no, we can see that corporations, capital, agents of capital, and many political powers work together. I mean, oligarchies are becoming, more and more powerful. Governments are becoming more and more authoritarian. And in many countries, governments are just downright fascist, right? We've seen that happening over the last 10, 15 years, and has been actually one of the impulse towards moving the Nyéléni process and movement towards convergence and intersectionality and international solidarity. Okay. But then those who provision most of the food in the world, who care for nature and the environment, and who work to produce the wealth of this world, workers, whether they are in factories, or in the domestic economy, or they're working on farms or on fishing boats. And of course, that's why I'm using the word provisioning rather than producing, because for a number of people who are there, who are working the land or who are working and producing the wealth, they're not necessarily even producing, they're gathering, they're processing. Many women in the in the food sovereignty movement may not necessarily, quote unquote, produce in the traditional sense, but they're provisioning because they're pulling all the food together, you know. So that's why I'm very deliberately using this term. Now, those who do this provisioning, they, over the last 15 to 20 years, regardless of whether you have the Millennium Development Goals or the Sustainable Development Goals or whatever the latest jargon in the United Nations is, they continue to face recurring problems that have become entrenched. You know, hunger and malnutrition, low wages, precarious work, casteism, patriarchal violence, casteism, racism, and discrimination by religion, by ethnicity is actually worsening over the last 10, 15 years, no? They face forced evictions, displacement, violence, criminalization if they stand up for their rights. They have an absence of effective remedy and justice and so on. And then when we saw what happened during COVID, who suffered the most? And the communities, the peoples at the front lines of the climate crisis are also those who are at the front lines and are the producers of the wealth of the world, but then are still, relegated to being those who face the most amount of hunger, poverty, and exploitation. So these challenges then make it very hard for people to organize, join forces, forge common demands, and then build collective struggles. So of course, different groups tend to focus on the oppressions that they will face most directly. But this also means that they have to survive, make a living, and at the same time, be able to stand up for their rights. So it makes them very vulnerable, makes people vulnerable and susceptible to division and even turn against each other. And I think, as you know, Sophie's already talked about false solutions, and Bruno's already talked about the importance of challenging them. So I won't go there. But I think one of the very strong points on the issue of tensions is for us to understand which are the forces that are dividing us. What are the forces that are oppressing and dividing us, and how do we try to address the structural challenges of survival, keeping in mind the intersectionalities of class, race, gender, caste, no? Keeping in mind all those, and keeping in mind the fact that we are located differently, no? Some people live in rural areas, some people live in urban areas, some people are slightly better off, some are not, some are workers, some are producers. Some are based in the global north, some are based in the global south. There are definitely different types of divisions, even in rural classes, among different kinds of food producers and wage workers and so on. So we are already, the 99% is already a differentiated mass who's struggling against a number of structural challenges. So I think these differences that we face, and we recognize them as diversities, and this is one of the important things about our movement, is that we're trying to convert difference into diversity. We're trying to convert all those things that oligarchs and the powers that be would like to use, and they are using to divide us. We're trying to convert them into collective strengths. But these can also become flashpoints and tensions. And I think Sophie referred to some of them, that was particularly in the feminist movement, but in the agroecology movement, in the food sovereignty movement, the workers' rights movements. Even on the issue of whether sex workers are workers or not. I'm giving you a very micro example here. In Asia, it's a huge debate, So when it comes to climate, one of the big tension points is the whole issue of offsets and the issue of zero. The net zero versus the real zero. And all of us will agree that emissions have to be reduced. There are no arguments about it. But of course, the tensions start coming in terms of some of the carrots or rewards that are offered through offsets, no? And let's remember that when we are tackling emission intensive and emission heavy industries and emission heavy modes of production, we're also talking about the livelihoods of millions of people. So, coal is a huge source of emissions. But coal miners across Asia and Africa and other places live in the most dirt poverty. They didn't create the climate crisis. They don't even consume the energy that they're producing, no? There are so many workers who work in industry. There's so many workers who work on trawlers or in the gig economy. They didn't cause the climate crisis. They don't benefit from any of these false solutions that are being promoted in terms of net zero and offsets and so on. But if we take a holier than thou position, if we take a purist strategy moving forward, they will lose their livelihoods. So what even does just transition mean? In India, for example, where I'm living, solar parks are displacing hundreds of thousands of people. And the more mechanization that comes in the name of smart digital technology, the more workers lose their jobs. The more displacement there is, the more women food provisioners are put out on the streets. So I think the biggest tension, to cut a long story short, comes from the fact that we are in a global industrial system that is fueled by certain ideologies and notions. And although majority of the world does not necessarily want that world and certainly does not benefit from that world, moving away from that is going to come at a very high cost to our own people. So how do we negotiate this way forward? Why don't I leave it there?
Thank you. Thank you, Shamali. I think one phrase that you said about what we mean by convergence is taking difference and turning into diversity and into collective strength. And I think that's so beautiful, and that really summarizes what we're talking about today. And there are so many really interesting questions coming in the Q&A box, so I want to make time for that. But before we get to that, I wanted to just zero in very quickly on the climate COP and turn to you, Bruno. Is there anything, any strategic lever at COP that we should really be focused on that might be elevating these frontline communities, the grassroots solutions that you said are tested and are working already? Is there a place where they will be elevated at COP, or a place that we should watch?
Well, I think as Brazilian civil society, in connection with the different movements that are globally building this, the idea of the People Summit, how this is being organized, I think we have been thinking of an inside-outside strategy, or to operationalize this strategy, and to have for example, I think we need to use the People Summit plenaries. It will be a space that is open, public mobilization, the media moments. These are all important to keep the autonomy of the struggles, at the same time that we use the COP's visibility to amplify the alternatives. So, and this for us is a very important issue. During the days of the People Summit, which I probably didn't give enough detail about that, but we're organizing this encounter around the November 12th, which starts with a protest, with the arrival of delegations that symbolizing the connection to the territories, to the collective resistance. And we have then, on the next 2 days, the spaces for plenaries. So this is an important space to build our demands collectively, because we want, on the 15th of November, which is the Global Action Day, to have an important, or a massive march in the city of Belém. So a demonstration, walking to the streets, that is also connected to people who can't be there. So it's really a global action day, that you have organizations and social movements around the world that are organizing themselves to have their voices heard, their demands. And on the next day, the 16th, we're talking from 12th to 16th of November, we have our the final declaration, the Treaty of the Peoples, ready and delivered to the president of the COP. And I think this is also really important to mention, because we have already a confirmation that he will receive this declaration, and recognizing the autonomy of the space of the summit. So it's not very direct, I think, to give this answer very shortly, but I think we have two things that need to be taken into account. We are approaching COP30 with the hope of the struggles, but also with vigilance. No, so we worry that exclusions, that false solutions, the corporate capture, they can generally marginalize the voices, but we have the demands for justice. We have the demand to reopen democratic spaces, and to have these kinds of responses from the territory, as we're saying here, that we want them to be heard and to be turned into action, into climate policy, and we want them to be, because we have, I think this is really important. We have the evidence that it works, and it comes from the territories. So I would go in that direction to answer this.
Yes, that's so exciting. I think a lot of people on the call are really excited and want to get involved in everything we're talking about, from Nyaleni to the People's Summit. And so I'm going to turn to the questions here. And the very first question, I'm going to read out three first, but the very first one is, this is the first time I hear about Nyaleni. How can people get actively involved in it? And likewise, what about the People's Summit? How can people get involved with it? So I think, Sophie, maybe you could speak to Nyaleni and Bruno about the People's Summit for folks on the line. And then beyond protest and awareness, what are the most effective collaboration models for climate action groups to directly support and amplify the food sovereignty and agroecology movements? So maybe Bruno, you can take that one on as well. And then Nyaleni just brought up multiple demands, some aimed at local governance, others at international systems that no longer function as they should. Shamali, you've been bringing this up. So how did the gathering address this challenge, and what perspectives emerged? So Shamali, I'll give you that one. But first, let's start with how can folks get involved? Sophie, and then Bruno.
Yeah, thank you. I think I was looking at all these questions, and they're all very interesting. And I really like how everybody is getting engaged and getting involved, because this shows that this webinar is actually speaking to us. Just like I shared, what is Nyaleni? And we shared that it's a global space of convergence of, like it's a global space, which means as a global citizen, you can be part of Nyaleni. So the only thing is that it is very practical, because at Nyaleni is not, I would tell you, it's not as open as the World Social Forum, where the World Social Forum, for example, I know many of us know about the World Social Forum, which was an open space. Anybody could come in anytime, regardless. Nyaleni, you have to have a constituency, because it is very, very particular about what it wants. We know that this is a food sovereignty space, it's an agroecological space, it's a climate justice space. So what is your call? What is the core activity that you're doing from where you are? So it is a global process, and also offers a platform for convergence. So what I would encourage the person is to find out the organizations from within your country that are already part of Nyaleni. Who's doing what? Is it the youth constituency? Is it the women's constituency? Because at Nyaleni, you come either as a constituency, you come in from the women's constituency, the youth constituency, or you come in as a region. Definitely you have a region if you don't have that constituency. So in your region also, we have people who come organized, because it's a very, very organized space. And it's also like, it's not so open for just people to walk in and out. So it's a place where people can actually be part of it through, like, for example, from Africa. So there's Nyeleni Africa, where we also have a coordination because we have structures. It's very organized in terms of structures. Me coming from the women's constituency in Africa, I was nominated by the women's constituency to join the Nyeleni process in Africa. And so when I joined the Nyeleni process, I am there representing not only my region. Sometimes they find me representing the grassroots women. Sometimes they find my voice speaking as an African, because then there's that convergence of space where people can actually, yeah. I mean, so that is how each region is really organized. Before we can go to the global space, we organize at the regional level, which gives people that opportunity to connect and converge locally. Because also for you to be part of your region, you also have a local uh, convergence, a local space that uplifts you to the national, to the regional level. So it's very important for people to come up with what they do, and that's why it's very important to join movements. Be part of a movement from your own locality. Sometimes you don't have to be in that global movement. Sometimes it's very important for you to just organize from where you are. And that is the strength of Nyeleni space. So you can be you can actually actively participate in Nyeleni by organizing from that locality where you are from. I hope I answered that.
Yes. And Bruno, what about the People's Summit?
Yeah, I think it goes in continuity with lots of things that Sophie said for the case of Nyeleni. But maybe the first particularity of this process is that, well, the People's Summit is going to be held in Belém, and this has been a very rich construction of our fellow comrades in the Amazon region. So this is the first COP to be held in a city in the Amazon. It's really important that we understand not only the symbolic, but also the practical realities of the Amazon, because the Amazon is also in the center of the climate policies, and to be in an Amazon city is also important for us to understand what it is. So it's going to be in a public university, which is also showing the connections to the struggles for democracy in Brazil. These are spaces that are rich in history for the popular struggles, and one thing that is so it's an open space, but it's also important on how we can organize ourselves to be in it. The entrance point for us in the People's Summit is that the organization, not individual, but organizations and movements signed the political letter, the manifesto for the People's Summit, which is available in the chat with the website, and also the social media of this Cúpula dos Povos, as we say in Brazil, the People's Summit, and organized to be in it, because all of the access, as someone has already mentioned here in the chat as well, or in the question, all of the access are doing their territorialization processes, their organizational process to arrive at the summit in an organized manner. So I think this is important. This is the entry point. I think the People's Summit is open to having more hands on it, to have more hands helping. We need help to build this space. We need to construct it collectively, and these are the first steps to be part of it. So there's lots of webinars, there are lots of seminars, there are lots of territorial actions that are taking place in this moment to arrive in the summit with this in a more organized manner. And there's also the 15th of November, which I think is really important as a global action day. So we know that not everybody can be in Belém, but we also are inviting people to organize themselves in their territories, in their countries, in their areas to hold a collective action on the November 15th.
Great, super. Staying with you, Bruno, the second question about how folks working in climate action, how can they support and amplify food sovereignty and agroecology solutions, those tested solutions that you mentioned earlier?
Yes, I think we have many keywords and we have many main ideas that came out here today, but I would really like to focus on this idea of convergence, because we have been learning a lot from it. I think these spaces that we're mentioning, the practices that we're mentioning, we're trying to learn with each other. And this has been a really rich period of learning together how to put these ideas together. So in my opinion, no, the connections that we had, for example, in Brazil, we have been saying how agroecology could relate to climate discussions. This was in ANA, the National Articulation, this was a main issue for us. And all the time we said, okay, we know that they are connected. We know that they are really intertwined. They are really together. But how do we make this visible? So the National Articulation of Agroecology in Brazil just released an action research that shows it was a participatory how do you say, a self-declaratory, a mapping of experiences in Brazil that were connecting agroecology and climate justice. So 500 experiences have been mapped that showed how in their local territories these ideas are brought together, and I can share them in the chat. I think this has just been released. We want to give visibility for it in the National Congress of Agroecology that's taking place next week, but also in the People's Summit in November. So there's going to be lots of material around that, and I think it's a very inspiring. I'm telling you about this because I think it's very inspiring. We need examples on how we can bring practical examples of how this convergence is being made. And what really surprised us or really inspired us is this idea that when we say, are we going to have answers from the territories about this? And we got in Brazil 500. We know that there are a lot more, but in a space of 3 months of mobilization, we got 500 experiences that were mapped with descriptions and testimonies, and I think this is real life, the real lives of people that are being that see in reality how this takes place. So I think this is a really practical example of convergence, and I know that there are lots of others, and we need to put them in touch with each other to make this together. No?
Yes, please do add that link in the chat and share with everyone. Thank you. Shamali, this question about at Naileni, was it brought up about how some of these international governance systems are really failing their mandate, and how can this be addressed? What kind of perspectives emerged at Naileni on this topic?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Shiny. Yes, it was not just brought up, it was discussed in almost every session, the failure of governance processes at multiple levels, and especially the international and the regional levels, the global levels, and what do we do about this? Okay, so people didn't, I mean, there were no there was no single answer, right? So I'll give you a range of responses that people were sort of converging towards, or, or were heading towards. One is that as far as possible, build governance from the ground up, because that's where your participatory democracy will actually work. So democracy then shouldn't be, just this sort of once in 5 years electoral act. Because unfortunately, procedural democracy has elected too many fascists into power, and too many corporate regimes, and too many oligarchies into power, no? So that democracy doesn't end with the casting of a ballot. There are a bunch of other values that go with actual participation, agency, autonomy, strengthening the territories, and so on. And also that even when we look at governance systems, even if you look at a political regime, it's very often the experiences of many people, of many delegates shared, that very often the local officials understand much better the realities of what's happening because they are embedded in those territories, right? So the more governance officials are embedded and governance systems are embedded in the territories, the more responsive they are to the actual challenges and issues that are coming up. And one of the big problems with global governance is its alienation. Is its alienation from actual people and territories. And of course, a big problem in the United Nations is the expansion of corporate control. And what's happening not just in food systems, but the expansion of corporate control in just about every UN agency. And this has come about because of a liquidity crisis, various financing crises, but also a belief in a certain sort of a liberal approach, which then became a neoliberal approach, that, a rising tide will sink all boats. So by and large, on the issue of the United Nations, the general sense was that this system needs to be radically reformed. And the way to perhaps do that is to build strength within our different territories and countries, to build a push up, build the pressure from people upwards, to push for our representatives who are there in these regional and international governance spaces to then represent their people, not corporations and not their vested interests and not business as usual. So that's one. At the same time, don't leave the battleground of the United Nations or regional spaces, because if we leave the battleground, that battleground will be occupied by other even more antagonistic and divisive forces. So stay and fight for what we want to fight in. But let's leave, how do I put it? We fight with realpolitik and strategy, but no need to romanticize these spaces, because we're fighting to salvage and whatever space we can to continue fighting. So every declaration we win, or every one paragraph we win in a declaration, is a victory, not necessarily of the entire struggle. Not, of course, it's the victory of the entire struggle. It's not victory of the entire fight, but what it's doing is it's winning us space and time to move forward. So I don't know, Shiny, if this responds, but there will be a common political agenda for action that will be released soon, which has been 2 years in the cooking, and then was, is being enriched by all the inputs from the delegations, and then there's a declaration in the cooking. So these will have a lot more about the question that Shiny asked. But certainly it's a very important question. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. It was. I think just to wrap things up, we have just a couple more minutes here, and it would be nice if you each could say, one message. If there was one message you could get across to everybody on the line right now, if they could take one main takeaway from the discussion today, from your perspective, very briefly, a sentence or two. Who would like to take it away first? Closing words.
All right, I'll go first then. Thank you. I think I want to pick it from one of the participants just shared, asking how they can be part of the processes. One of the things that I really want to, a takeaway that we need to take home is that each one of us should get involved. We are at a very critical moment right now where everything is quickly disappearing. Be part of something, do something, like get organized, because sometimes we wait to be organized. Sometimes you don't have to wait for invited spaces. Can we invent our own spaces? Now we know the conversations, we know what it's all about. Can we start inventing our own conversations from the grassroots level, in the small communities, in the neighborhoods where we are? Can we just start collaborating and talk to people about climate change? Let's talk about food sovereignty. Let's talk about agroecology. There's so many resources out here. Each one of us has access to the net. There are organizations that are doing amazing work, doing agroecology schools every day, supporting peer-to-peer learning every day. These are spaces you can actually make great use of. So let's not just sit and wait for something to happen. Be that change that we want to see. So go out and work. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Bruno?
Yes, it's in the same spirit. I think we need to build convergence. We need to build the idea of this webinar. No, it's rising up together. So I think there's the open invitation that we need to do this together, and I think we need to take advantage of this. So for me, the main idea and that I have been taking with this is convergence, learning together, acting together, doing it collectively. And I think the strength comes from this. No, the strength comes from, as Sophie just said, right now we're doing this with the responses that are coming from our territories, that are coming from our lives, and yes, and we need to do this together. So
Great. Obrigada. Shamali.
Yeah. Thanks. Just adding my voice to that. All the constitutions, or at least all the constitutions that I've read of different countries, and the Charter of the United Nations says, we the people, we the people, we the people, right? I just want to say, we are the people, not those people sitting in the boardrooms, not the people sitting in the Congress or whatever, no? Or flying around business class and first class. We are the people of our countries. We are the people of the United Nations. And we claim that power. And claiming that power, we build convergence, we respect intersectionality, we build internationalism, we build global solidarity. And so this is something that I'm taking away from this discussion. I'm taking away from the Nyaleni. And I really wish I could have been in Belém, but we will organize on the 15th of November across Asia, in our different territories, we will be organizing. So for me, this is a very important takeaway. And of course, the importance of learning how to learn. I think there's always way more room to learn how to learn. And I thank you very much, everybody, on this webinar for teaching me that.
Thank you. Thank you, Shamali. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Bruno, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone in the audience for joining us today. Thank you to the Climate Action Network, Action contre la Faim, and my beautiful co-organizers, Robbie Blake and Marie Cosquer. And a huge thank you to the interpreters. Thank you so much for all your hard work behind the scenes. And folks, get out there and meet with other folks. We are the people. Find your people. Join the movement. Thank you very much.